And joining me now from New York is Peter Liang's attorney, Rae Downes Koshetz. She is also a former prosecutor in Manhattan and a former deputy commissioner with the New York Police Department. Also with us from Los Angeles is Frank H. Wu. He is a professor at the University of California, Hastings College of Law. His opinion pieces have appeared in major U.S. newspapers. Welcome both to the show. Rae Downes Koshetz, I want to start with you. This case has been described as a tragedy, both for the death of the unarmed black man, but also for Peter Liang as well. Can you just talk us through how tragic this case is?
Well, this was an accident that turned into a criminal indictment for a very serious felony. And we went to trial and presented what we thought was very convincing evidence that this was an accident, and only an accident, and the jury convicted. And we are going to appeal this very, very aggressively, because we sincerely believe, and I think there's a lot of opinion that's going with us, that the conviction did not fit the elements of either of the crimes of which he was convicted. How
is Peter Liang feeling and his family after this conviction? You could see the shock in the courtroom as the verdict was read out. I saw your hand go on his back there too.
He is absolutely devastated, and he is terrified. Understandably, he's 28 years old. He is a very gentle, intelligent, principled young man, and he has felt absolutely horrible about this.
Frank, I want to bring you in from Los Angeles. Obviously a tragic case. We saw the demonstrations over the weekend in the Asian American, Chinese American community. What's the feeling here? And obviously this case can't just be taken in a vacuum. Consider the amount of police officer violence that's been reported in the US media and globally in the last 12 to 18 months.
That's right. This issue has been around for a long time. Those of us old enough remember the video of the Rodney King beating here in Los Angeles. And many people would have said until about a year and a half ago, well, that was the past. Except now there have been so many incidents, and with everyone having a smartphone and cameras at all times, we have video. We can watch it and we can see. And in case after case, whether it's in New York City or Baltimore or elsewhere, there's a pattern, and it's disturbing, where African-American men, unarmed, are beaten, shot, killed by law enforcement. This is a societal problem. It's complicated, it's controversial, but it's led to this groundswell of public anger. Entirely understandable.
So do you
Black Lives Matter movement and so on.
Frank, do you believe that Peter Liang was somehow swept up in all this?
Yes. So what's happened is there's all this background. And when you look at the number of prosecutions, there haven't been many. And there are almost no Asian American cops. There are a few, and it's great to see that. So it's just very strange, and that's what Chinese Americans have pointed out. Nobody condones a shooting by a cop of someone unarmed, regardless of the identity of the officer or the victim. And it's important to say that loudly and clearly, and I would say that. And I am saying that. But what many Chinese Americans have asked is, wait a minute, there were dozens of other cases that either weren't prosecuted or were resolved very differently. There was a plea bargain or something along those lines. And the first big, spectacular case that comes out of New York involving a shooting in this recent time period involves someone who's Asian American, where much of the evidence suggests it wasn't one of those terrible, egregious cases. It's a tragedy, but not intentional.
Rae Downes Koshetz, I want to go back to you. Prosecutors in the case said Peter Liang fired his gun when the victim wasn't armed, so therefore that is a prosecutable case, perhaps more than Eric Garner, who died after a chokehold, because he wasn't actually responsible, Peter Liang, the police officer, for his firearm. What's your view on that?
This is not a case of police brutality at all. His gun misfired by accident. It ricocheted off a wall. And what happened here is that after all the evidence was in, the prosecutor appeared to change his theory of the case completely and summed up on a different theory of the case, telling the jury that Peter had fired at this man, that he certainly expressly or impliedly said that Peter had intentionally fired his weapon and fired it at a Kai Gerling. That is just not true, and it's not supported by the evidence.
And the area that he was patrolling was a notoriously difficult area for policemen, correct?
Without a doubt. Without a doubt.
Describe that for us.
Public housing in New York City is extremely difficult to patrol, particularly the stairways and the roof landings of these places are dangerous. There are many, many law-abiding people who live in these places, but from what we were able to divine during this trial, many of them go home at night and lock their doors because it's at night when criminals take over. And there are a lot of gangs in these projects, and it's a very, very dangerous environment. So these vertical patrols, as the NYPD calls them,
up and down the stairs, yes.
Up and down the stairs, up to the roof landing, are very perilous for police officers. And in fact, it was testified to during the trial that that officers are told that it is okay to have your weapon out when you're going up to those roofs.
I just want to bring in Frank again. Do you think, I mean, Liang obviously shouldn't be given a pass because obviously of his ethnic identity, but do you think he was singled out here? Do you think there is a scapegoat here going on?
It certainly looks that way when you look at the pattern, but in legal terms, very hard to prove. The legal term would be selective prosecution. That is almost impossible. Ironically, the leading Supreme Court case on the subject, when laws are applied unevenly, is a case from 150 years ago called Yik Wo versus Hopkins. It's out of San Francisco, involves Chinese laundrymen who were having a law about laundries enforced against them while their white rivals didn't. So there is precedent, but
so
it's
you're pointing to a pattern here that goes back through American history. You're saying that, you know, we talked a lot about the Black Lives Matter argument, but you're saying that this happens against Asian Americans as well?
That's right. So for many Chinese Americans, even those who are newcomers, what they see is a pattern where people of Asian or Chinese descent face a legal system that's hostile and that singles them out. So there isn't clear proof here, but so many have raised this question. Why was this case prosecuted so vigorously when others weren't?
Can I also bring in you again, Rae? Selective prosecution? Do you believe that?
I agree with the professor. It's almost impossible to prove. If I could get into the mind of a prosecutor or a jury and understand exactly what their motives are, I'd be rich.
Would you make
I've never been able to do it. I've been doing this for almost 40 years, and I couldn't do that. But I think that the professor is absolutely right. Legally, it's almost impossible to prove.
I'm not the lawyer you are. Would you make it part of your appeal?
I doubt that.
Why?
We're not considering that right now because we don't have the evidence to back it up.
But there is this deep-seated feeling within the community. Is that going to help, do you think, in terms of keeping this case in the limelight as we go through the appeals process?
I'd like to think so. And it was certainly heartening to see the thousands and thousands of people who came out to Cadman Plaza in Brooklyn on Saturday. And there were also demonstrations in other cities. Chinese people are very, very offended by this.
And can I ask you one more question?
Sure.
When you see, obviously, the deaths that we've seen at the hands of police in Ferguson, on the streets of New York, and then Peter Liang, your client, is mentioned in the same sentence or the same paragraph as that, how does that make you feel as his defender?
It's terribly unfair, and it's just wrong. But I think that this courtroom was filled with elephants, and they were the elephants of Ferguson, Missouri, of Cincinnati, of Staten Island. And here's something that is a sheer accident.
Frank,
And it's being treated as though it's police brutality or corruption, which it most certainly is not.
Frank, I want to finish with you. Obviously, Peter Liang's thoughts very much with the Asian American, Chinese American community. He's not exactly the poster boy of police violence, is he? I mean, when you've seen the other incidences, there have been confrontations. This, as Rae said, was a shot that was fired in darkness that ricocheted. This is a difficult case for everyone, isn't it?
That's right. Race is complex. It sometimes brings out the worst in us, all these mutual suspicions. And that's what this case confirms. Race is the American tragedy. There's a big difference between what we believe and what we can prove in a court of law. The challenge for the lawyers will be to undo this verdict. It's a tough, tough challenge.